chapter 25, starting at verse 14, and we're looking at being ready for Christ's return, part 2. Now, a week or so ago, we examined how to be ready for Christ's return, and we looked at the parable of the talents. Well, I want to look at that again, but from a different angle. And the first truth to learn if you're going to be ready for Christ's return, which is what the parable's all about, is you have to grasp that you don't own anything. Now, if you don't adopt that view, your Christian life is going to be one long series of fighting God's will, struggling with worldliness and generosity, worrying over your investments. Look at Matthew 25:14. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. Now, when you look at this passage alongside the account that's given in Luke, the parable's telling us that Christ is gone to heaven, where he's going to be crowned king, and he will be returning. In the meantime, we're to be ready for his return. And the way to do that is to consider the fact that everything that you have, as we're told here, is God's property. And told in verse 14, God's property entrusted to you. You and I don't, as believers, don't own anything. Our body, our time, our abilities, our opportunities, our possessions are all on loan. But why do we need to be told this? Well, what does our sinful nature do with what it is that we have? It always does the same thing. It runs off with our lives as though those lives were our own. You remember the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15? He runs off with his father's possessions to a distant country. That means as far as he could get. That's exactly what we do. We take our lives and we just run from God and we go as far as we can possibly go so that we're not even bothered by hearing his name, that we can dull our consciences by not even thinking that he exists. But the Luke 15 goes on to say, there he wasted his money with riotous living. And that's telling us that anytime you take a part of your life and you run off with it, that's a part of your life that's just going to be wasted. Now, just as soon as a child can start making decisions for themselves, if they don't know Christ, they're going away from God. So why does our sinful nature do this? Let's remind ourselves. Well, from God's point of view, our sinful nature is not just a thief running off with our own lives. Jeremiah 17 verse 9 to 10 says that man's heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And then the bit that's seldom quoted is God goes on to say, I, the Lord, search the heart. So whilst we may think that we're jolly decent people, as God looks into our heart, as only God can, he knows the potential wickedness that you don't know because his restraining grace does just that, restrains it. The scripture says we're spiritually dead in trespasses and sins, and by nature are objects of God's wrath. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1 and 3. Romans 1, 25 to 32 and Romans 8, 7 says that our very nature is hostile to anything God wants us to follow. It's hostile to holiness. We are rebels against God. In Romans chapter 5, verse 6 to 10, God calls all unrepentant people his enemies. Think how many people, and including church people that don't know him, how many there are who have no idea that they are in fact God's enemies. In Romans 1:30, human nature, we're told, positively hates the God of the Bible. And the proof of it all is that we have stolen our lives, and lives that rightly belong to God, and we've run off as if they belong to us. What did God do? Did he do anything about this? Let me give you a passage from Revelation chapter 5, verse 9, which says that in heaven those who are saved will be singing a new song. And here are the lyrics. You, Jesus, are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain. And with your blood you purchased men for God from every tribe and language and people and nation. With your blood you purchased men. That's exactly what the word, that theological word that you hear a lot, the word redemption means. Our sin is a massive debt to God. Somebody's got to pay it. Either you pay it or Christ will pay your debt on your behalf. Christ went to the cross, as we've heard many times here. Your sin was placed on him. He suffered the punishment that you should have suffered, so that standing in your place, he paid the debt to God that you never could. So he purchased you back. And that is why the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 6:19 says, you are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore honor God with your body. You don't own anything. You don't own your body. You look at this far left parade of sin. The very central issue is that everything's mine. It's my body. The baby inside of me is mine. I can do what I like with mine. Everything you have has been entrusted to you by God. It all belongs to him. And that's what Jesus said is the prerequisite to following him. So consequently, when you become a believer, the first thing you've got to do is to give back to Christ what belongs to him. You can't follow God and hold part of it back. Somebody said that Jesus is either Lord of all or he's not Lord at all. In Luke chapter 9, verse 62, Jesus replied, nobody who puts his hand to the plow, in other words, to work for God, and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. In Luke 14:33, Jesus said, so therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he cannot be my disciple. This is a starting point with God. You have to acknowledge that everything in my life belongs to God. Everything is just on loan. One day I'm going to have to give it back. Now somebody will say, well, yeah, but what if I keep taking some of it back and I do what I like with it without consulting God? What if I did that? You'll do that, and you'll do it all the time. Did you know that the Apostle Paul always did that? And that's why he says in 1 Corinthians 15:31 that I die daily. Every single day he'd wake up, and it wasn't long before he knew his will wanted to go left, whereas God wanted him to go right, and he had to die yet again to his own will. Now you might ask, well, what kind of life would that possibly be if I had to constantly die to my own will? Would that be a miserable life? Jesus responds to this in John chapter 10. And in verse 10, he says, the thief, referring to Satan, he comes only for three reasons. He wants to steal something, he wants to kill something, or he wants to destroy. He said, but I have come that you might have life and you might have it to the full. So whenever you steal a part of your life from God and say, no, that's mine, I'm going to do what I like with it, you're not only imitating, but you're submitting to the thief. Who's that? That's the devil. And it will result in something being killed, something being stolen from you, something being destroyed. But when you submit your whole life to Christ, Jesus said, that's when you start to walk into the abundant life. In Matthew 10, verse 39, Jesus makes it very clear. He says, whoever finds his life, that's his own way of life, is eventually going to lose it. But whoever loses his life, gives up his life, his will, for my sake, will find real life. Isn't that why the Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians 6:10, said, I have nothing, and yet I possess all things. The call that Christ makes to every one of us is the call to surrender everything to him. Now, he might give most of it back to you. He might change a little bit, but it's got to be available to him. It's the desire to have him Lord of all. When you get saved, the first thing that the scripture says that the New Testament believers did is they would get baptized. But the very rite of baptism expresses the commitment of the believer. That is what? You remember, baptize means immersion into the water and then out of the water. And it's to illustrate that we're dying to our sinful nature and we're being raised again to newness of life. I'll read you the verse, Romans 6:3. Don't you know that all of us who are baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? It's symbolizing us dying with him. We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life. There again, you see, it is death to self that opens the door and inaugurates a whole walk in the divine life. In 1 Corinthians 4:6, it asks, who makes you different from anyone else? And what is it that you have that you didn't receive from God? And if you received it from God, why do you boast as if you didn't, as if it was something you earned? That's saying everything you have in your life, your abilities, your opportunity, your time, your money, is a loaner. And Jesus is here talking about how to be ready for his return. By the way, the promise of heaven is actually only for those who die daily. 2 Timothy 2:11 says the saying is trustworthy. For if we have died with him, we will also live with him. Now, let's be clear, you don't go to heaven by dying daily. You don't earn heaven. It's just that dying daily is the evidence that you've truly been converted. Galatians 5:24 says, those who belong to Jesus Christ have crucified the sinful nature, which is passions and desires. It doesn't mean it's crucified it once and for all and now you're perfect. It just means you've crucified the sinful nature, like the Apostle Paul, every single day, again and again. John Piper said, it's not that the believer has no wicked thoughts or intentions. It's just that he's at war with them. And we pursue, whereas we used to pursue just sinful pleasures, we now passionately pursue that which pleases God and have to keep dying to ourselves. If you give 9/10 of your life to Christ, that just means you stole 1/10 of your life. You don't have to steal the entire store to be a thief. In Revelation chapter 3, verse 15, Christ is speaking to the church of Laodicea, and he says, I know your deeds, but you're neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were either one or the other. But because you're lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. The great evidence for a phony Christian is that they only give to God what they don't mind losing. So, how do you give up everything to God? Let me give you some biblical steps for doing that. Luke 14:28. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? So that's the first thing Jesus says you've got to do, is you've got to count the cost. If actually following Christ means that I have to turn every aspect of my life over to him for his scrutiny and say, you're Lord of that. What is it you would like to change? I'm not holding anything back. If that's what it takes to be a follower of you, am I prepared to pay that price? If the answer is no, you can't get to stage 2, because there's no moving forward after that. But if the answer is yes, then here's a second step you can take. Ephesians 4:22 says, daily put off your old self, the sinful nature, which is being corrupted by its sinful desires. It's getting more and more corrupt. To be made new in the attitudes of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. So every day you're putting off something, your old nature, you're putting on something new. And what is that? That's your new nature. So he's saying you've got to wake up every morning, and just like your pajamas, you've got to consciously take off your night clothes, your sinful self, and consciously put on a new attitude. And that attitude is, Lord, I want to be like you in righteousness and in holiness. I want to live for your will today, not my own will. Everything I have is yours. 1 Peter 4:2 tells us to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. And then, of course, die daily. So all of that is a great attitude, but then you've got to actually die daily. And how do you do that? Romans 12:1 says, present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. So daily, you've got to sacrifice your will when you discover that it's running opposite to God's will. Is that going to be painful? Yes, it is, because he said it'll be a sacrifice. He's not talking about how we dandy the word around. He's talking about something dying. Colossians 3 says, put to death what belongs to your sinful nature. That is painful. But here's a good piece of news. 1 Peter 4:1 says that anybody who has suffered in his body is done with sin. So if there's a sin that just you keep tripping over and you keep coming back to, the reason is because you have yet to get to that place where you say, I am prepared to go through whatever suffering I have to go through in order to do without the pleasure of that sin. And then those who have suffered in the body are done with sin. How do you give up everything to Christ? You count the cost. Am I prepared to give my life up for the Lord? Number 2, you wake up with the right attitude. Not my will, Lord, but thine be done. Thirdly, when you encounter something that is opposite of your will, you know it's what God wants you to do, then you die to your will daily. And then finally, you've got to follow the leadership of the Holy Spirit. Galatians 5:16 says, so I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. Holy Spirit knows exactly when you're about to go the wrong direction. And if you're listening, he'll go, hey, but no, you don't. Don't do that. Go read a book. Whatever it is he's diverting you from. If you hear that voice and obey it, then you'll avoid the sin. Once you get into the sin, it entangles you. Now let me go back to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 6:10. Having nothing, yet I possess everything. How does that work? How does giving my life away to Jesus, everything back to him as though it belonged to him, how do I die to my own will? And well, we've just looked at that, but how does doing that result in my life becoming more abundant? John 12:24, Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls in the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. When I accept and I have a worldview that my life doesn't belong to me, my things don't belong to me, I'm going to start bearing fruit. And plenty of it is personal. First thing is I'm going to worry a lot less. You know, we talked about this in another sermon, that it was an observation of mine, having had 3 children, that right at the outset they learn this word mine, and they use it all the time. That's mine. And you can't take it from them, something away from them, because they say it's mine. And as I've pointed out, nobody's ever taught them to say the word mine. It's just they pick up on it because it's something that their sinful nature is going to require for their own personal use. Well, what else do we know about babies? We know that they cry and they grieve and they fret over just about everything. There's a relationship there. You see, we do the very same thing. But if we truly realized that God has entrusted his property to me, and that we stop saying and thinking mine, we'd have a lot less to worry about. You know, the only person who can say mine is actually God, and he likes to say it a lot. In Haggai chapter 2 verse 8, God says, the silver is mine and the gold is mine. In Psalm 50 verse 10 to 12, God declares, for every beast of the forest is mine, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you, for the world and its fullness are mine. You got talents, you got treasure, you got some time. You think you've got that? No, it's on loan. God says that's mine. Now, of course, if you grasp this, that it doesn't belong to you, your anxieties are going to go down a lot. 1 Corinthians 7 verse 20 says, when you buy something, act as if it wasn't yours to keep. Realize it's even though I may have purchased it, it's still on loan to me. Debbie and I came out of Publix one time, and we started walking towards our blue car. And to our horror, we noticed that the whole back end had been caved in. And we stopped and we thought, oh, somebody must have swiped it and just driven off. Well, as we stood there in horror, I looked at her and I said, well, there goes another $500 deductible. And we both said, what a drag, what a drag. So we started to walk closer. And then our grief suddenly vanished like the dew on a Florida morning sunrise when we realized it wasn't our car. Somebody had parked their blue Nissan Rogue in front of our blue Nissan Rogue at what we thought was the very same spot, but when we got close enough, we realized our car was the one behind it. And of course we said, oh, Lord, thank you! Which of course was thanking God that it was now somebody else's problem. But such is life. So first, knowing everything in your life belongs to God, it's not yours. You're not going to worry so much. Your portfolio will not be the north, south, east, and west of your concerns. Also, you're not going to suffer from envy. If you look at verse 14, he says, again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1 talent, each according to his ability, each according to his ability to handle it. Now, you see, if I can concede that what I have is God's portion for me, it doesn't matter how industrious I was or how industrious I weren't, if that's an English sentence, everything, my drive to pursue things is a gift from God. But if I realize that everything is God's portion for me, that ultimately you can't add to it, you can't take away from it, there comes a divine contentment. And 1 Timothy 6:6 says, godliness with contentment, meaning godliness with contentment with God's portion, is a great gain. I mean, not to mention, think how my pride would be quarantined if I actually believed that the fact that I have maybe more than another person has got nothing to do with me. Ultimately, it's God has enabled me to become a wealthier than another person. Why has he entrusted me with more? Because I'm more trustworthy? No, because there's a lot of people who have a lot who aren't trustworthy at all, who are terrible people. But just simply because he intends to hold me more accountable, because to whom much is given shall much be expected. Believing that God owns everything is going to result in you watching over your Christian life more carefully. Why is that? Well, as a renter, Debbie and I are very careful to protect somebody else's property because we want to get our deposit back. That's our reward. In Luke's passage, it says that on the day when Jesus comes back to settle accounts, if you've not been trustworthy with somebody else's property in this life, who will give you property of your own? You may lose a lot of your deposit. Knowing it's somebody else's property, everything I have belongs to God, not to me, you're going to have a greater desire to choose holiness. See, 1 Corinthians 6:20 tells us that we have been bought at the price, therefore we must glorify God in our bodies. Well, now think about that. If I'm vitally aware that my body doesn't belong to me, it belongs to God, if that's my worldview, then I've actually consciously got to go through the process of stealing it and taking it back in order for me to be unchaste. That's a whole extra step. knowing that I own nothing and I'm just a steward of what belongs to God, I'm going to worry less. I'm going to have, my contentment's going to be more. I'm not going to be envious of what other people have. I'll be much more circumspect in my Christian walk. I'll have a greater desire for holiness. And also, finally, you'll have a greater desire to fulfill God's purpose for your life. Look at verse 19. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, look, you've entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful to a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. See, if I know that my time, if I know that my wealth, if I know that my abilities are all on loan from God, then I know that they're going to have to be returned. I know that one day he's going to want to see what I did with what belongs to him. And that's going to make me a lot more passionate about investing my life in growing his kingdom. Here's my simple prayer, is that may the Lord help us not only to believe, but to act upon this one statement by Jesus. Whoever renounces his or her life for me, the same will find it. Amen.